The moment I had the divorce papers in my hand, I heard my husband demand that I choose one of our 3 sons and take him with me. I took my daughter's hand and gave a cold smile. They are not my children. I won't be taking a single one. Boston. That year, a late autumn arrived early. The wind from the public garden reached the gates of the Beaumont mansion, swirling dry leaves across the gray cobblestones. I thought I was preparing the annual family dinner, but it turned out to be the evening that 10 years of my life would be severed. My name is Genevieve Hayes. I'm 34, and I'm from a small town in western Massachusetts. I once studied to be an artist, dreaming of a small art gallery. But after marrying Alistair Beaumont, I packed away all my watercolors and brushes under the bed. Alistair was the CEO of Apex Holdings. From the outside, people said I was lucky to marry a wealthy man and live in a mansion overlooking the park, but only those on the inside know that some houses are so large, no one can hear you cry. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Beaumont, 66, with her hair pulled back in a sleek bun and a heavy gold bracelet on her wrist, often said, "The Beaumonts have no shortage of money, only a lack of respect for tradition." And her tradition, to put it bluntly, meant that a daughter-in-law should know her place. A grandson was placed on a pedestal as the future of the company, while a granddaughter was just expected to look pretty and marry well. There were 3 boys in the house: Sterling, 10, Brooks, 8, and Pierce, 18 months old. Eleanor called them the 3 great heirs of the Beaumont line. Sterling had the largest room on the 2nd floor. Brooks had piano, French, and swimming lessons. Pierce only had to make a sound, and the entire household would revolve around him. And my daughter, Cora, who had just turned 5, was placed in the cold, formal guest wing, far from the lively nursery. I had put a low wooden bed there for her and hung a few of her drawings of daisies. But even that, Eleanor said, was an unnecessary indulgence, insisting that a Beaumont daughter must maintain a pristine, austere environment fitting her social class. That evening, the house was preparing for the annual family dinner. I had been on my feet since morning, coordinating with the high-end caterers, inspecting the floral arrangements, and ensuring the silver was perfectly polished. I stood by the dining table, adjusting the silk napkins, while the hired chefs prepared the duck in the kitchen. Eleanor paced back and forth, constantly reminding me, "Align the centerpieces more neatly. The guests are all people of status. Don't give them a reason to laugh at a Beaumont daughter-in-law's lack of taste." "Yes, mother," I would reply. It had become a habit. Over 10 years, the word yes had become something like a kitchen towel hanging by the stove. You just grabbed it when it was needed. By dinner time, the table was set in the grand dining room. In the center stood a roasted duck with a cherry reduction, alongside a Waldorf salad, warm popovers, a consommé as clear as a tear, and wild mushrooms from Vermont that Alistair loved so much. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, with Alistair to her right and the 3 boys next to their father. I sat at the far end, next to Cora. My mother-in-law immediately carved the largest piece of duck for Sterling. "Eat up, Sterling. The heir to the family must be strong to one day lead it." Sterling smirked as he chewed. Brooks demanded a piece of the crispy skin, and Pierce wanted another popover. Eleanor happily served each of them. Cora looked at the elaborate dessert tray and said quietly, "Grandma, may I have a little piece of the chocolate tart?" Eleanor froze, her fork in midair. "A young lady of your standing must watch her figure from an early age, Cora. Sugar is for those who lack discipline. What will people think? That your mother taught you no restraint." Cora's small hand recoiled. I placed a piece of white meat on her plate, trying to smile. "Eat this, Cora. It's more tender." Alistair, sitting opposite me, didn't look up from his phone. I waited for him to defend his daughter, but he only frowned. "Genevieve, don't spoil the dinner. Mother is right. She wants the girl to be well-mannered." I put down my fork, a lump forming in my throat. I used to believe in keeping the peace at any cost. But by constantly yielding, I realized, some concessions don't bring peace, they only breed contempt. After dinner, as I was clearing the dishes, Alistair called me. "Genevieve, come up to the living room. We need to talk." I wiped my hands, told Cora to play with her teddy bear in her room, and followed him. The living room shimmered under a crystal chandelier. On the wall hung a family portrait. Alistair with his hands on Sterling's and Brooks's shoulders, Eleanor holding Pierce. And Cora and I were off to the side, at the very edge of the frame. In that photograph, my daughter and I were merely background. Alistair sat on the sofa, crossed his legs, and placed a blue folder in front of me. Eleanor was there too, fingering a string of pearls, her face as stern as if she were judging a criminal. I looked at the folder, and a chill went through me. "What is this, Alistair?" He pushed it toward me. "Divorce papers. I had the lawyers prepare them, read them, sign them, and don't make a scene." The single word divorce was like a bucket of ice water. I opened the folder. Inside, it stated that I was voluntarily leaving the Beaumont home, voluntarily waiving any claim to the division of assets, and pledging to remain silent about all family and Apex Holdings affairs. The alimony offered would barely cover a couple of months' rent, and the section for Cora's child support offered a laughable minimum. I looked up, my voice trembling, but I tried to hold myself together. "Alistair, for 10 years I was your wife. Is this all I'm worth?" He sighed. "Don't be dramatic. For 10 years you lived in this house, and Mother denied you nothing. If we part amicably, it will be better for everyone." Eleanor set down her teacup. "You are a woman and should know your place. This house gave you status for 10 years. The fact that we are letting you go on good terms is us saving you from embarrassment." "On good terms? If this is what you call good terms, then all the bitterness in the world must be wrapped in pink paper." Alistair produced another sheet of paper. "As for the children, I've had the lawyers draft a custody arrangement. You can have primary custody of Brooks or Pierce, along with generous child support for him, provided you sign the NDA. Sterling stays with me. A mother needs a son to focus her energy on, and this will keep you comfortable." I froze, staring at him. At that moment, I didn't see the husband to whom I had once sworn my fidelity. I saw a man who divided children like items in a warehouse. Eleanor nodded. "That's right. Although you didn't bear us any heirs, you raised them. We are giving you one of the boys that is a great kindness." From the corner of the room, Sterling, who had been playing on his tablet, looked up. "Dad, is Mom really leaving? Who will make my pancakes in the morning?" Brooks nudged him and whispered just loudly enough for me to hear. "Probably Sabrina. She smells nicer than Mom." Pierce, clutching a toy car, didn't understand anything and just giggled. And Cora was standing behind the curtain, her eyes red from crying. She was hugging her old teddy bear. Looking at her, I suddenly saw everything with absolute clarity. For 10 years, I could tolerate this for myself, but I couldn't let my daughter grow up in a house where she was treated as a superfluous shadow. I went to Cora and took her tiny hand in mine. It was ice cold. "Mommy, where are we going?" she whispered. I squeezed her hand and looked directly at Alistair and Eleanor. For the first time in many years, I didn't lower my head. Outside, the wind from the park grew stronger, and branches tapped against the window pane. Alistair frowned. "Choose. Don't drag this out." I looked at the 3 boys, then at my daughter. There is a truth that, once spoken, can shatter the strongest-seeming house. I took a deep breath, still holding Cora's hand. "Fine. I will choose." I let go of her hand, bent down, and straightened her little sweater. She looked up at me, her lips pressed tightly together, as if she were afraid that if she cried, her grandmother would scold her again. I placed the teddy bear in her arms and stood up straight. Alistair was still sitting on the sofa, in the posture of a man waiting for a report from a subordinate. Eleanor sipped her tea, confident that I finally knew my place. I looked at the boys. Sterling was absorbed in his tablet. Brooks was leaning back in his chair. Pierce was rolling a car on the rug. 10 years. I remembered comforting Sterling when he had febrile seizures, rushing Brooks to the hospital in the middle of the night with an asthma attack, spending hours with Pierce, coaxing him to eat one more spoonful of oatmeal. Did it hurt? Yes. But that pain didn't mean I would let them continue to trample on me. Alistair tapped his fingers on the table. "Have you chosen?" I gave a bitter smile. "I choose Cora." Eleanor slammed her cup down. "Are you insane? I'm talking about the boys who hold the trust funds. Cora is a girl. She will never sit on the Apex board. She'll grow up and marry into another portfolio. A woman who walks away from the future CEOs of the Beaumont Empire is an absolute fool." I looked her in the eye. "Thank you, Eleanor, but I don't need anyone to secure my legacy. I have hands, feet, and a profession. I am taking my daughter because she is my daughter." Alistair snorted. "Stop it, Genevieve. I'm offering you a son because I'm thinking of you. Your pride is misplaced." I slowly turned to him. "Alistair, I'll say this one last time. I do not choose Sterling. I do not choose Brooks. And I do not choose Pierce. They are not my children. I won't be taking a single one of them." A silence fell over the room, as if someone had sucked out all the air. The sound of Pierce's rolling car stopped. Brooks looked up. Sterling turned off his tablet. Everyone was staring at me. Eleanor jumped to her feet. What did you say? You lived under our roof and spent our money for 10 years and now you want to disown the children you raised? Truly, an ungrateful woman. Her words cut deep, but I knew I couldn't let myself be bound by other sins forever. Alistair lost his composure as well. Genevieve, you're saying this out of spite. Don't drag the children into our adult problems. I opened my cloth bag, which was by my feet, and took out a brown envelope. I had kept it for months, and every night it had made me tremble. But now, when the time came to open it, I was calm. I placed 3 sheets of paper with lab results on the glass table. These are the DNA test results for Sterling, Brooks, and Pierce. All 3 are your sons, Alistair, but they have no maternal connection to me. Alistair's face turned pale. Eleanor snatched one of the sheets, scanned it quickly, and threw it back on the table. A forgery! You forged the documents to take the girl from us. I pulled out copies of the payment receipts, checks, and confirmations from the labs. I had the tests done at 3 different centers, using different samples. If you wish, I can demand a court-ordered test with direct sample collection. I'm not afraid. Sabrina, who had been standing quietly by the staircase this whole time, stepped forward. Mrs. Beaumont, she said softly. This must be some misunderstanding. Please don't frighten the children. I turned to her. Sabrina, and you still call me Mrs. Beaumont? They say still waters run deep. You've played the role of the modest nurse in this house for far too long. Sabrina's face went pale. Alistair slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Do not insult our guests. I laughed. Guests? Then explain to me why the old archives of the Genesis Clinic have the name Sabrina Wells, right around the time Sterling was brought to us? Why, when Brooks was in the hospital, a nurse accidentally asked where Mama Sabrina was, and why does Pierce have the exact same birthmark on the back of his neck as she does? Sterling suddenly jumped up. Dad, Mom, what are you talking about? Who is Sabrina? No one answered. The silence of adults can sometimes wound more than an admission. Eleanor screamed, Children, to your rooms! Who allowed you to listen to this? But Sterling didn't move. He looked from me to Sabrina. Brooks was tugging at his sleeve, and Pierce started to whimper. I didn't want the children to hear any more. The guilt lay with the adults. I said more softly, Sterling, take your brothers upstairs. The boy froze, hearing my familiar tone, but Eleanor was already shouting at the staff to get them out. Pierce burst into tears. His crying pierced my chest, but I didn't allow myself to show weakness at the wrong moment. When only the adults and Cora, hiding behind my back, remained in the living room, Alistair stood up. What do you want? Money? The house? Or just to disgrace our family? I shook my head. I want a divorce. I want custody of Cora. And I want you and your mother to stop using these 3 boys to tie me to you. Eleanor sneered. You think you can just walk away? You raised them from infancy? All our relatives know you as their mother. If you abandon them now, all of Boston will call you heartless. I looked at her for a long time. All of Boston may not know the truth, but sooner or later, the truth will out, Eleanor. Sabrina suddenly burst into tears. Genevieve, it's my fault. I loved Alistair, but the children are innocent. You raised them for so many years. How can you just abandon them like this? I looked at her. Her tears were beautiful, each drop calculated to move a man. You're right. The children are not to blame. But the one who gave birth to them and used them as a key to enter a wealthy home and then pawned them off on me to raise, she is not without sin. Alistair came closer. Genevieve, think carefully. If you make a scene, you'll get nothing. You have no job, no home. How will you live with a young daughter? I squeezed Cora's hand tighter. I can live in poverty, but I will not allow my daughter to grow up in a house where she is considered less important than the family's honor. Eleanor pointed to the door. Fine. If you're so proud, then leave. But once you cross this threshold, don't you dare come back. A woman who leaves her husband is despised. I bent down and picked up my suitcase. Before I left, I looked at Alistair one last time. I thought my silence would save the family. It turns out I was only protecting your rotten shell. As of today, I'm giving it back to you. Cora clung to my hand. The heavy oak door opened, and a cold autumn wind rushed in. Behind me, Eleanor was screaming something. Sabrina was sobbing, and Alistair was shouting my name in a rage. But I didn't look back. I led my daughter down the front steps. The lamps in the garden were still lit, and the water in the pond with its decorative koi murmured as if nothing had happened. The Beaumont mansion was beautiful, so beautiful that outsiders thought only happiness reigned within. But I knew, the brighter the light in a house, the deeper the shadows in its corners. I held Cora close and dragged the suitcase toward the wrought iron gates. That night, I didn't take a single one of the heirs, as they wanted. I took with me only my daughter, 3 sheets of DNA results, and a truth that would rob the Beaumont family of sleep for a long time to come. The taxi pulled away from the cobblestone drive in front of the mansion. The wheels rustled over the dew-dampened leaves. I held Cora. She was so tired that her head rested on my chest, her hands still clutching the old teddy bear. Through the glass, the lights of the Beaumont house grew distant, bright and cold, like the light in a house without a soul. I didn't cry. It's strange, but when pain reaches its limit, tears seem to freeze. All I could hear was the beating of my own heart. Memories from 10 years ago flooded back with startling clarity. Back then, I had been a daughter-in-law in the Beaumont house for just over 6 months. I was young and believed that if I were hardworking, modest, and obedient, my mother-in-law would eventually grow to love me. My own mother had taught me, when you marry, daughter, remember. Choose your battles wisely, and always know when to compromise. I listened, and I poured all my sincerity, along with my clumsiness, into my husband's kitchen. It was the day of the annual charity gala in honor of Alistair's grandfather. Late December, freezing cold. In the yard, workers had been setting up a tent since morning. On the estate grounds, Eleanor had deliberately dismissed the event coordinators, insisting that a true Beaumont wife must prove her worth by managing the entire gala setup herself, directing the tent crews, inspecting the heavy floral arches, coordinating the valet layout, and overseeing the table settings. I was 3 months pregnant. My belly wasn't showing yet, but I felt exhausted. And running around the estate in heels for so long made my head spin. I quietly asked Eleanor, "Eleanor, I feel dizzy. May I sit down for 10 minutes?" She was checking the guest list and frowned when she heard me. "You've barely joined the family, and you're already acting like a fragile porcelain doll. How do you expect to host high society? It's a major event, the press is watching, they'll judge the whole family. You're pregnant, not dying." I bit my lip and, saying yes, Eleanor, hurried over to the dining hall again to adjust the heavy silver candelabras. Alistair was in the yard with the guests. I wanted to call him, but changed my mind. Back then, I was still afraid of damaging his prestige. Toward lunch, my stomach started to ache. I leaned against the edge of the table, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck. One of the assistants, seeing my pale face, said, "Mrs. Beaumont, you should go lie down. I'll finish up." Eleanor immediately turned around. "That won't be necessary. The wife of the heir must be on the front lines." I didn't argue. A daughter-in-law's position is often such that you lose not because you're wrong, but because the moment you open your mouth, you're being defiant. I stayed on my feet until the end. As I was carrying a massive stack of porcelain presentation plates to the dining room, my vision went dark. The plates crashed onto the marble floor. Eleanor, without even trying to catch me, screamed, "My God, what clumsiness! What a disgrace!" I only had time to clutch my stomach. Blood soaked through my cream-colored dress. Alistair ran in from outside, his face as white as a sheet. He swept me into his arms. All the way to the hospital, I held his hand and repeated, "Alistair, save our baby, save our baby." But the baby couldn't be saved. That night, I lay on a hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling. Alistair sat with me for a while, then got a call from work. Before he left, he stroked my hair and said quietly, "Rest." Mother didn't mean for this to happen. I guess it just wasn't meant to be. I turned to the wall. The phrase "not meant to be," so easily spoken, landed like a stone on my chest. 3 days later, I returned home. Eleanor made chicken broth, bought honey and nuts, but never once said, "I'm sorry." She just stood in my doorway and said in a monotone, "What's gone is gone. The Beaumont family needs an heir. You're young, recover and try again." I listened, and a chill went through me. To her, my lost child was just an unfulfilled objective. Soon after, Alistair took me to a private clinic, the Genesis Clinic, on the outskirts of Boston. A man in a white coat looked at my records and said I had a high risk of miscarriage and should undergo IVF under strict supervision. Confused, I asked, "Doctor, if we do this, will the baby definitely be ours?" He smiled gently. "Don't worry. In such delicate cases, The family can authorize the husband to handle all the arrangements to avoid stress for you. I looked at Alistair. He took my hand, his voice unusually tender. You just lost a child, don't torture yourself. Let me handle everything. We don't want relatives gossiping, so it's better to do this quietly. I believed him. I believed him because he was my husband, and at that moment, I needed any hope I could get. A few months later, on a rainy morning, Alistair brought home a tiny baby boy. Eleanor held a small celebration, telling close family. Genevieve was weak, so we kept the pregnancy a secret. I looked at the infant in white swaddling, his tiny hand gripping my finger. Alistair said, "This is our son." He named him Sterling, the treasure of our house. I cried. Not from doubt. I cried because I thought heaven had returned my child to me. From that day on, I became Sterling's mother. When he had a fever, I paced the room all night. When he said his first word, "Mama," I ran to Alistair with joy. He only smiled distantly, while Eleanor took Sterling from my arms, saying, "A Beaumont boy must be strong. Don't let his mother make him too soft." 2 years later, Brooks arrived under similar circumstances. Alistair said there were remaining embryos from the IVF procedure, and the doctor advised against delaying. By then, I had grown accustomed to the role of a mother, watching Sterling grow, and I didn't want to dwell on my anxieties. Brooks had asthma. He would struggle to breathe in damp weather. I learned to give him back massages, use an inhaler, brew special teas, and record his medication times in a notebook. And Eleanor would boast to relatives that her second grandson was smart and healthy. Then came Pierce. By this time, Sabrina had started appearing in the house more often. She said she was hired as a caregiver for Eleanor, whose joints were aching. Sabrina was quiet and obliging, always saying, "Yes, Mrs. Beaumont, of course, Eleanor." My mother-in-law adored her. One day, while I was in the kitchen preparing formula for Pierce, I heard Eleanor talking to Sabrina on the terrace. "You should be here more often. The children are drawn to you." I thought she was just talking about general care. Only now do I understand that every word she spoke had a hidden meaning. When Pierce was brought home, I was already exhausted, but looking at the tiny creature in the bassinet, I couldn't be cold to him. They say nurture is more important than nature. I believe that if you love truly, blood doesn't matter. But the Beaumont family didn't need my love. They needed my hands, my silence. They needed a woman to stand before relatives so the 3 boys would have a flawless biography. The taxi horn brought me out of my reverie. Cora stirred on my chest. "Mommy, are we not going back to Grandma's?" she whispered. I kissed the top of her head. "No, sweetie. We're never going back there." Outside, the lights of Boston glowed. Sometimes, a door slamming shut behind you is the first step toward finding an exit. I hugged Cora tighter. That night, I hadn't just left a mansion. I had left a lie that began the day I lost my firstborn. A lie that began at the Genesis Clinic, at the moment I held Sterling, thinking it was a miracle. I didn't know that on that day, I hadn't embraced a blessing. I had embraced a performance that would last for nearly 10 years. The next morning, as the sun barely touched the balcony of our rented apartment in an old building, I woke up before Cora. She was asleep, curled up under a thin blanket, still hugging her bear. I looked at the suitcase in the corner, holding the 3 DNA test results. I didn't decide to get the test on a whim, nor was I suddenly overcome with jealousy one fine morning. A woman who lives in her husband's house for a long time can sometimes tell from a single glance, a snippet of conversation, a sudden silence something is wrong. After Sterling was brought home, I loved him like the child who had been taken from me and then returned by heaven. He was a restless baby, often running a fever at night. Once, his fever spiked to 104 degrees. Alistair was at a meeting, and Eleanor was playing cards in her room. I called a taxi by myself and took him to the children's hospital. All night, Sterling cried himself hoarse, his tiny hand clinging to my collar. He called Mama through his sobs, and I felt both pain and joy. But as Sterling grew older, he became more like Alistair, with a cold gaze and a habit of getting everything he wanted. From childhood, Eleanor instilled in him, "You are the heir. This house will be yours." At 7, he could already point at Cora and say, "You're a girl. You can't come into my room." When I corrected him, my mother-in-law would wave it off. "The child is speaking the truth. Don't make your grandson humble himself before a girl." Brooks was different. He was thinner, wheezed often, and had trouble breathing on windy days. He wasn't defiant at first, just afraid of his brother and grandmother, so he often agreed with them. There were nights when he had an asthma attack, and his lips would turn blue. I would hold him, pat his back, and coax him. Brooks, breathe slowly. Sweetie, mommy's here. In those moments, I believed that motherhood was more than just blood. Pierce was the youngest. He had dimples when he smiled. He was spoiled to the point that at dinner, the staff would peel his shrimp and cut his food into tiny pieces. If I made him eat by himself, Eleanor would frown. He's still little. Boys in this family are not born to bow to a plate of food. And then Cora was born. I gave birth to her on a rainy morning. Holding my own child for the first time, I cried so hard I soaked the entire hospital pillowcase. I thought Alistair would be happy, but he only glanced at her briefly and said, "The main thing is that you're both healthy." And Eleanor walked into the room, looked at the red, wrinkled Cora, and sighed. Another girl. From that day on, the bias in the house showed in everything. In the food, in the gifts, in the words. For Christmas, the three boys each got a thick envelope of cash. Cora got a thin one and the phrase, "For a girl's good luck, why does she need a lot of money?" For Halloween, Sterling got a huge superhero costume, Brooks got a robot suit, and Pierce got a drum. Cora got a cheap pumpkin bucket hastily bought at the gate. She was still happy, running around the yard. "Mommy, look how beautiful." I smiled at her, but my eyes were filled with tears. The first cracks appeared when Sterling fell in the schoolyard and needed stitches. The doctor asked about the parents' blood types for a cross-check. I gave mine and Alistair's. The doctor looked at them and paused for a moment. He didn't say anything, only advised rechecking because old records can be inaccurate. I asked Alistair. He frowned. "Are you really going to take one doctor's word over your husband's? All the documents are at the Genesis clinic. They're kept there. Don't make things up." I fell silent. But that silence was no longer trust. It was the beginning of remembering. The second time was when Brooks was hospitalized with a severe asthma attack. I was sitting in the hallway with an inhaler in my hands, my eyes red from a sleepless night. An elderly nurse, passing by, glanced at Brooks and casually remarked, "So, where's Mama Sabrina?" I looked up. The nurse realized she had said too much, and, quickly looking at the chart, corrected herself. "Oh, sorry, I got confused. So many children these days." At that moment, Eleanor approached from the end of the hall. She gave the nurse a look as sharp as a knife. The nurse immediately fell silent and hurried away. I asked, "Eleanor, why did she call Sabrina Mama?" Eleanor answered coldly, "They often make mistakes in hospitals. You should be watching your son, not collecting gossip." The third time was with Pierce. One day, while bathing him, I noticed a light brown birthmark on the back of his neck, shaped like a curved leaf. The next day, Sabrina was cleaning Eleanor's room and bent down to pick up a scarf. The collar of her blouse shifted. I saw the exact same birthmark on the back of her neck. She caught my gaze and quickly fixed her collar. "Did you see something, Mrs. Beaumont?" she asked with a nervous smile. I replied, "Nothing. It's just that your birthmark looks like Pierce's." Her face paled for an instant. Just for an instant, but it was enough to make my heart go cold. And the final push came from Cora. That evening, she was sitting in her corner, coloring. Suddenly, she asked, "Mommy, is Sabrina my brother's mom?" The crayon fell from my hand. "Who told you that?" Cora looked down. "I heard Grandma telling Sabrina that the brothers are the voting shares of this family, and I'm just an expense, so I shouldn't argue with them." I hugged my daughter. It turned out that in this house, a 5-year-old child was already hearing what the adults thought they were carefully hiding. From that day on, I stopped asking questions. Questions would only put them on guard. I secretly collected Sterling's hair from his pillow, Brooks's old toothbrush, and Pierce's discarded pacifier. Getting my own sample was easy. I sent them to one Boston lab under a friend's name, and then another set to a different lab for confirmation. During the days I waited for the results, I continued to cook, take Cora to preschool, prepare formula for Pierce, and pat a coughing Brooks on the back. Eleanor still sent me to clean her study, Alistair still came home late, and Sabrina moved in and out of the house with a smile as soft as cotton and as cold as a needle. I told myself, stay calm. If you want to kill a snake, you have to cut off its head, not scream at the sight of its shadow. The day I received the first results, I sat for a long time in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. The lines on the paper were cruelly clear. 0% probability of maternity. 2 days later, the results from the second lab arrived the same. A control sample, taken from a scarf Sabrina had used in my mother-in-law's room, showed a clear biological link between her and the 3 children. I thought I would scream, that I would storm into the house and demand an explanation from Alistair. But I didn't. I just folded the papers and put them in the brown envelope. There is a kind of pain that, if you cry too early, weakens you before you can save yourself. That evening, I returned to the mansion as usual. Eleanor told me to reheat the soup. Alistair asked where his dark blue blazer was. Sabrina, giving my mother-in-law a massage, smiled at me. Genevieve, you're back. I smiled back. Yes, I'm back. No one knew that at the bottom of my closet, 3 sheets of DNA results lay next to my old dusty paints. No one knew that the woman they considered habitually submissive had begun to stand up straight within herself. From that moment on, I was no longer waiting for apologies. I was waiting for the day the truth would come to light on its own. I returned to the present at the moment the mansion gates clanged shut behind me. The sound of metal on metal was dry, as if someone had slammed a lid on 10 years of my youth. Cora walked beside me, her small feet stumbling over the edge of the suitcase. I bent down, picked her up, and rolled the suitcase behind me, its wheels rattling on the cobblestones. On the street, the wind from the park blew through my collar. It wasn't dark yet, but the lamps along the esplanade were already glowing with a yellow light. The elderly doorman looked at me with doubt. He was used to seeing me step out for fresh groceries every morning and walk with the 3 boys in the yard every evening. And today, I was leaving with my daughter in my arms and a suitcase, like an exile. He asked quietly, Genevieve, where are you going at this hour? I managed a weak smile. From now on, Frank, don't call me that. I'm taking my daughter somewhere peaceful. He lowered his head and said nothing more. Sometimes, strangers show you more compassion than the people you've shared a table with. I hailed a cab. As the car pulled away, Cora pressed her face against the window, watching the mansion recede. She asked quietly, Mommy, did we forget my paints? My heart clenched. Adults tear a home apart, and a child mourns a forgotten box of crayons. Mommy will buy you new paints, Cora, with lots of yellow, okay? She nodded, but her eyes were still red. I stroked her hair. The car drove through the streets, past old trees rustling in the wind. Boston that evening was as bustling and bright as ever, smelling of exhaust and roasted nuts from street vendors. Only my life had taken a different turn. In the cloth bag on my lap, besides the documents, Cora's birth certificate, and the 3 DNA results, there was also a tiny memory card. It looked worthless. But I knew it held what would rob Alistair of his sleep. I wasn't tech-savvy. The files on that card had come to me over the years I had been a shadow behind Alistair. Sometimes he would come home late, drop a stack of contracts on the table, and say, Genevieve, scan these, please, they're due in the morning. Sometimes he'd call from the office, open my work computer, send me the budget from the Apex 2024 folder. Quickly, don't ask questions. I did it, like a wife who thought she was helping her husband. But over time, the numbers grew stranger. A set of furniture for a conference room cost several times the market price. A shipping contract was signed with a new firm whose address matched the address of a building where an acquaintance of Sabrina's lived. The Eleanor Beaumont Foundation, which was often seen on television handing out gifts to poor children, had line items in its reports for entertainment expenses, jewelry purchases, and birthday party organization. At first, I just felt uneasy. Then I started saving copies of what Alistair asked me to handle. I didn't hack computers, guess passwords, or make anything up. I only copied documents from the shared home computer, emails he asked me to print, and scans I had made with my own hands. I kept them not for blackmail, but so that if I were ever pushed off a cliff, I would have something to hold on to the truth. The taxi stopped in front of an old apartment building in Dorchester. I had rented the apartment from an old college friend, on the 3rd floor. A narrow concrete staircase, railings with peeling paint. Downstairs in the courtyard was a small diner that smelled of soup, garlic, and fried onions. A little farther down, an old woman sold pastries. Cora looked up at the old building. Mommy, are we going to live here? I nodded. Yes, this is our new home. She looked at me for a long time, then asked, Will Grandma not yell at me here? The question pierced my heart. I hugged her and answered slowly. No one will yell at you without a reason anymore. Mommy's here. The apartment was a little over 600 square feet. Yellowed wallpaper, old tile on the floor, chipped in places. But there was a window overlooking old poplar trees and a small balcony where I could put a couple of flower pots. I turned on the light. A dim white bulb. But Cora looked around and sighed with relief, as if she had just stepped out of a downpour. I spread a thin blanket on the bed. Cora lay down, hugged her bear, and was asleep within 10 minutes. She didn't flinch or cringe when footsteps were heard through the wall. I watched her for a long time. It turns out a child doesn't need a big house to feel safe. They just need to not be afraid. I opened the suitcase, took out a few sets of clothes, the documents, and a small tin box with my old paints. This set had been with me since my student days. Many of the tubes had dried up. The brushes were frayed. I picked up one brush and suddenly felt my hand tremble. 10 years. I had almost forgotten what it was like to paint for myself. The next morning, I woke up early. My personal savings were small, but they would be enough for a few months of modest living for my daughter and me. I went down to the diner and had a bowl of soup. The owner asked, "You new here?" I smiled. "Yes, my daughter and I just moved in." A hot bowl of clam chowder, with oyster crackers and a piece of crusty bread. I ate, and a lump formed in my throat. In the mansion, the table was laden with expensive dishes, but I often couldn't swallow a bite. Here, a $10 bowl of soup made me feel alive. I bought a roll of light blue wallpaper, 2 pots of geraniums, and a new box of wax crayons for Cora. Seeing the crayons, she beamed. "Mommy, there's so much yellow in here." I stroked her head. "From now on, Cora, you can draw with whatever color you want. No one will make you use only gray." In the evening, I set up a small table by the window and put up my easel. I opened my old laptop and uploaded a few of my old illustrations to a freelance group. An editor from a children's publishing house immediately wrote to me and asked if I would be willing to draw the cover for a collection of American folktales. The pay wasn't high, and the deadline was tight, but I immediately agreed. That night, after Cora fell asleep, I turned on the desk lamp. From the hallway, I could hear the clatter of dishes. On the floor below, a child was doing homework. Normal life, so noisy, but more pleasant to the ear than the luxurious silence of the mansion. I inserted the memory card into my computer, made another copy on a separate hard drive, and put the original in the tin box at the bottom of the closet. I knew Alistair wouldn't leave me alone. People like him can leave a wife, but they will never let anyone hold them by the throat. I looked at the sleeping Cora. Her eyelashes still held traces of dried tears. I told myself, "Genevieve, from now on you cannot show weakness at the wrong moment." On the balcony, the 2 pots of geraniums had not yet bloomed. But I believed that as soon as the sun came out, they would open their buds. Just like my daughter and me. Even though we had been thrown out of the golden cage with almost empty hands, we still had our hands to start over. That night, in the small apartment, there were no crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains, or servants. But for the first time in 10 years, as I locked the door, I felt a lightness in my heart. Because behind that door, there was only me, my daughter, and the truth, waiting for its moment to come to light. A week after we moved, a persistent drizzle settled over Boston. The concrete staircase became damp and cold, and the old walls smelled of moisture. I sat by the window, sketching ideas for the book cover. On the floor, Cora was coloring a yellow cat. As she drew, she asked, "Mommy, can I make the cat's tail blue?" I laughed. "Of course you can. It's your cat. You can dress it in whatever you want." Cora giggled. That laugh made our 600-square-foot apartment feel a little more spacious. I was about to get up to make soup when there was a loud knock on the door. Thump, thump, thump. Not like neighbors knocking to borrow sugar. This was the knock of someone used to giving orders, who bangs on a stranger's door as if summoning a servant. Cora flinched, the crayon dropping from her hand. "Mommy." I put a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. Go to your room and sit with your bear. I'll see who it is." I looked through the peephole. Outside stood Eleanor and Sabrina. My mother-in-law was wearing a dark purple velvet coat, a string of pearls around her neck. Sabrina stood behind her in a beige trench coat, holding an expensive handbag. I opened the door a crack. Before I could say a word, Eleanor pushed it open forcefully. "Are you going to keep me on this staircase like a beggar?" I took half a step back, holding the door. "Eleanor, this is a rented apartment. If you want to come in, you have to ask first." She froze, probably hearing me call her by her first name instead of mother for the first time in 10 years. "Well, listen to you. A few days after leaving your husband's house, and you've found your voice." "They're right. Ungrateful." Sabrina quickly interjected, her voice as sweet as syrup. "Genevieve, Eleanor is worried about you and little Cora. It's so hard for a woman alone with a child." I looked at her. "Thank you for your concern, Sabrina. But my daughter and I are not in need of sympathy from the very people who forced us out of our home." Sabrina's face tensed for a moment, but then she lowered her head, her eyes turning red. "I know you're angry with me, but the children at home keep asking about you. Pierce won't eat, Brooks is constantly coughing, and Sterling is angry at everyone. You raised them from infancy. Don't you feel sorry for them? Eleanor struck the floor with her cane. Did you hear that? You thought you could just leave and be done with it? My grandsons are used to you. Sabrina needs to look after my health. How can she manage everyone on her own? Pack your things and come back. If you want to bring Cora, fine, but don't disgrace the Beaumont family. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. So, you came because you're missing the person who cooks the oatmeal, takes the children to school, brews the teas, and cleans the house. And here I thought you missed your granddaughter. Eleanor's face turned purple. Don't be sarcastic. Do you have any idea what this apartment looks like? The walls have mold, the staircase is narrow, and it stinks of the diner downstairs. A Beaumont granddaughter is going to live in a place like this? People will laugh. I replied, it smells of soup, fried onions, and life here. Your mansion smells of sandalwood, but my daughter was afraid there every night. Sabrina, without waiting for an invitation, placed her bag on a plastic chair. Genevieve, Alistair, said that if you come back, he'll let you live in the guest house and take care of Cora. The more you resist, the worse it will be for you. I looked her straight in the eye. The guest house? You say that as if you're inviting me to a resort. What you really want is for me to come back and be a nanny to your children, right? Sabrina turned pale. Don't speak so crudely in front of the child. Cora peeked out from her room. Seeing Eleanor, she shrank back, pressing her back against the closet. My mother-in-law immediately stepped toward her. Cora, come here, let Grandma look at you. What kind of manners are these, hiding from your grandmother? Cora clutched the hem of her sweater, her eyes filling with fear. I stood in front of her doorway. Don't come near my child. Eleanor's eyes widened. Your child? She's a Beaumont granddaughter too. I'm her grandmother, and I want to hold her. Who's going to stop me? She is your granddaughter, but she is not a thing to be dragged around wherever you please. The atmosphere in the small apartment grew tense. Sabrina glanced into the hallway, where several neighbors had cracked open their doors. The more Eleanor lost face, the angrier she became. Don't think a couple of papers make you somebody. The Beaumont family fed and clothed you for 10 years. Without Alistair, who are you? A provincial artist, that's who. Those words stung my old pride, but this time I didn't lower my head. I was about to respond when footsteps were heard on the stairs, followed by a calm male voice. Excuse me, who is disturbing the peace at my client's legal residence? I turned. In the doorway stood Marcus Thorne, my lawyer, with a briefcase in his hand, his shirt sleeves rolled up from the rain. He was supposed to stop by for some additional documents. Eleanor frowned. And who are you? Marcus handed her a business card. I am Marcus Thorne, an attorney representing the interests of Miss Genevieve Hayes. This apartment is my client's legal place of residence. Unlawful entry, threats, defamation of character, and attempts to contact a minor child without the mother's consent can be documented and addressed in accordance with the law. Eleanor sneered, but with less confidence. Lawyers. This is a family matter. Stay out of it. Marcus looked her straight in the eye. When one party is pressuring the other during divorce proceedings, it ceases to be just a family matter. Sabrina pulled Eleanor's arm. Eleanor, let's go. People are watching. It doesn't look good. My mother-in-law, clenching her teeth, pointed at me. You think a lawyer makes you a queen? Real queens don't live in chicken coops like this. I replied calmly, that's fine. Even sparrows know how to build nests. The important thing is that the nest isn't used to smother its own young. A few neighbors in the hallway chuckled softly. Eleanor's face darkened. Sabrina quickly pulled her down the stairs. Their heels clattered on the wet concrete. When they were gone, Cora ran out and hugged my legs. She was still trembling. Mr. Thorne placed his briefcase on the table. Genevieve, from now on, do not open the door if they show up unannounced. Any incident must be documented. I nodded and took the tin box from the closet. Inside were the DNA results, documents from the clinic, copies of old messages, and that same memory card. Marcus studied everything carefully, his face growing serious. Good, we need to handle this by the book. No online posts, no arguments. First, we protect your custody rights over Cora. Then we deal with the threats and slander. As for the financial documents, I will help you forward them to the appropriate authorities. I looked at my hands. The same hands that once washed dishes, changed diapers, brewed teas, and set tables. But on that day, they were no longer trembling. Marcus closed the folder and said slowly, From this moment on, Genevieve, we don't fight with tears, we fight with evidence. I looked at Cora. She was picking up a blue crayon that had fallen under the table. When I cried, they called me weak. When I was silent, they thought I was stupid. Well, from this day on, let the papers, the evidence, and the truth speak for me. The night after Eleanor and Sabrina's visit, I barely slept. The rented apartment was quieter than the mansion, but I flinched at every creak in the hallway. Cora slept beside me, pressed close, sometimes startling in her sleep and whispering, "Mommy, don't let Grandma in." I stroked her back until her breathing evened out. Outside, the drizzling rain left tiny droplets on the fire escape. I stared at the folder the lawyer had left on the table and understood clearly. The Beaumonts wouldn't stop at verbal abuse. Sure enough, 2 days later, as I was working on sketches for the folktales, someone pounded on the door. "Fire safety inspection! Open up!" I froze. Cora, who was drawing next to me, immediately climbed onto my lap. Through the peephole, I saw 3 unfamiliar men. One, in a black jacket with a tattoo on his wrist, looked nothing like a building inspector. And behind them, around the bend in the staircase, another man was hiding with a phone in his hand. I didn't open the door. I turned on the voice recorder on my phone, immediately called the building superintendent, Mr. Peterson, from the first floor, and texted my lawyer. They pounded again from outside. "Open up, inspection. If you don't cooperate, we'll file a report." Standing behind the metal door, I said loudly enough for them to hear, "Show me your identification through the mail slot. I've already called the superintendent to confirm." There was a moment of silence, then some cursing. The man from around the corner stepped forward. It was Alistair. He was wearing a gray trench coat, his face dark with anger. "Genevieve, stop the theatrics. Open the door. Let's talk." I watched him through the peephole. The man I had shared a table and a bed with now stood at the door of my rented apartment like a debt collector. "We have nothing to talk about in the middle of the night." Alistair lowered his voice. "Give me the memory card. If you keep those papers, you'll only make things worse for yourself. I'm still trying to be nice about this." I almost laughed. People often use the phrase being nice to cover up their not-so-nice intentions. "Alistair, I've given all the documents to my lawyer. If you send your men here again, I'll send this audio recording along with the security camera footage." Alistair looked up at the corner above the door. A small camera I had just installed was blinking with a red light. At that moment, Mr. Peterson came upstairs with 2 neighbors. The 3 strangers exchanged glances and began to back away. Mr. Peterson asked, "What kind of inspection is this without any warning?" No one could answer. Alistair, clenching his teeth, looked at me and turned around. Before heading down, he hissed so quietly that only I could hear, "You'll regret this." The door closed. Cora hugged my waist tightly. "Mommy, is Daddy mad at us?" I knelt down to be at her level. "Daddy is doing the wrong thing, and adults who do the wrong thing must be held accountable." "This is not your fault, Cora." I said it to her, but also to myself, to stop my own trembling. But the real storm didn't end on the landing. The next morning, as I was about to take Cora to preschool, my phone started ringing nonstop. An old acquaintance sent me a link to an article on a local news blog. The headline was sensational: "Tycoon's wife blackmails husband with company documents after divorce." My name wasn't mentioned, but the hints were clear enough. Ex-wife from Western Mass, studied art, lived in a Back Bay mansion, now renting in Dorchester. My hands went cold. Below were hundreds of vicious comments. "Gold digger. She's just greedy. Abandoned her 3 sons to blackmail him." At lunchtime, the editor from the publishing house called me. "Genevieve, we love your illustrations, but there's some unpleasant information circulating online right now. We'll have to put the cover project on hold for now. Please understand." I held the phone for a long time, finally managing to choke out, "Yes, I understand. I understood that people feared trouble. I understood that a woman's reputation could be tarnished with a few anonymous lines. I understood that in this day and age, vicious tongues weren't just on park benches, but also in the palm of your hand." In the evening, I went to the store for pasta and meat. 2 neighbors on the stairs, seeing me, started whispering, "Is that her?" She looks so quiet, but in reality, I walked past without a word. In the past, I probably would have burst into tears right there on the staircase. But now, I had to go make dinner for Cora. That evening, Cora sat over her bowl of macaroni and cheese. She held her spoon but didn't eat. I asked, "What's wrong, sweetie?" She looked at me, her eyes clear but sad. "Mommy, at preschool, a lady said you're a bad person, and that's why Daddy doesn't live with you. Is it because I'm a girl?" Is that why they don't love you? I put my plate down. A lump formed in my throat like I had swallowed a fishbone. I pulled her close. No, Cora, listen to me. No one is to blame for being a girl. And I'm not a bad person for protecting you. People don't know the whole story, so they say untrue things. We don't need to argue with everyone, but we will prove everything with facts. Cora buried her face in my shoulder. I don't like it when they say bad things about you. I kissed her forehead. I don't like it either. But we're not going to feed on other people's mean words. We're going to eat our own food and live our own lives. She let out a small laugh. Mommy, you sound like the lady who sells soup downstairs. I smiled too. A small smile on a very hard day. Yes, life is full of drama, but dinner still needs to be made, vegetables still need to be peeled, and a child still needs a bath. When I told the lawyer everything, he wasn't surprised. This is an organized smear campaign. Do not react emotionally. Take screenshots, save the links, record the publication times. I will contact a notary to certify them and send a demand for the removal of false information. I asked, what if they just publish it again? All the better for our case. Every false article is another piece of evidence. Remember, we don't fight by shouting. We fight with things they cannot deny. I sat in front of the computer screen, one by one saving every article, every comment that mentioned Cora, every fake account spreading the same information. I used to tremble at a single raised voice from my mother-in-law. But that night, reading the vilest words, I was terrifyingly calm. Late that night, I opened the sketch that the publisher had rejected. It was an illustration for the story of Cinderella. I looked at the girl in rags by the fireplace, but with shining eyes. In old fairy tales, good people had a fairy godmother. In real life, good people, to survive, have to learn to gather evidence themselves. I wiped my tears and adjusted the lines on Cinderella's face. I no longer drew her crying. I drew her with her head held high. In the small apartment, Cora slept peacefully. I saved another file of evidence to the hard drive and wrote in my notebook, Day 7 since leaving the Beaumont house. They have started attacking my reputation. I closed the notebook. A woman's reputation isn't found in the words of a crowd. It's in whether you dare to stand up straight when they try to back you into a dark corner. After the night the slanderous articles spread online, I changed nearly all my habits. In the morning, when I took Cora to preschool, I would wait until she was inside her classroom and her teacher, Miss Gable, had marked her present before I left. In the evening, when I picked her up, I would arrive 15 minutes early, sit in the coffee shop by the preschool gate, and keep my eyes fixed on the green entrance. Some might say I was being paranoid, but a mother who senses a threat to her child hears an approaching hurricane in every creak of the floorboards. That day, I had a meeting with a client in a downtown office building to discuss a book cover. The meeting ran long. When I went down to the underground parking garage, my phone lost its signal. I didn't know that at that very moment, Eleanor Beaumont had appeared at Cora's preschool. Later, when Miss Gable told me the story, I could picture the scene. Eleanor, in an expensive cashmere coat and with a perfect hairstyle, holding a bag of pastries and juice. Beside her was an unfamiliar man who introduced himself as the Beaumont family's driver. She walked straight into the office and announced, I am Cora Beaumont's grandmother. There is a family emergency today. Her father has instructed me to pick her up. Miss Gable hesitated. I'm sorry, but according to the rules, only individuals on the authorized pickup list can take a child. Cora's mother has specified that she is the only one picking her up lately. Eleanor placed her phone on the desk. On the screen was a text message from Alistair's number, the same one registered with the school. Family matter. My mother will pick up Cora. Please cooperate. She also presented an old access card, her own ID, and a copy of Cora's birth certificate. At first glance, everything looked legitimate. The only thing that wasn't legitimate was the fact that a grandmother, who had previously treated her granddaughter as if she were invisible, was suddenly so eager to retrieve her. Miss Gable was still hesitant and started calling me. But my phone was in the parking garage, out of service. A second call, a third no answer. Eleanor began to raise her voice. What is this outrage? The girl's great-grandfather is in critical condition. The family is gathering to say our goodbyes. I am her grandmother. Her father has given permission. How long are you going to detain my child? Several parents standing nearby turned to look. The young teacher, flustered by Eleanor's authoritative tone, finally called for Cora. When Cora saw her grandmother, she backed away. I'm not going anywhere. I'm waiting for Mommy. Eleanor grabbed her arm, trying to force a smile for the teacher. Grandma will take you to Daddy. Mommy is busy. Cora started to cry. I want my mommy. Eleanor leaned down and hissed in her ear, quietly but distinctly. Be quiet this instant. Beaumont girls do not make scenes in public. When I drove out of the parking garage, my phone vibrated with notifications. 5 missed calls from Miss Gable and a text. Genevieve. Cora's grandmother picked her up with her father's permission. Please call back. Reading it, I felt my legs give way. I immediately called back. Miss Gable, who gave you permission to release my child to Eleanor Beaumont? The voice on the other end was trembling. Genevieve, I'm so sorry. Her father sent a text. She had all the documents. I couldn't reach you. I was almost shouting. Do you know that I left written instructions that only I am authorized to pick up my child? Where's my daughter now? As I said this, I ran out into the street, trying to hail a cab, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't dial my lawyer's number. All I could see was Cora's frightened face, Eleanor's glare in my apartment, and Alistair's words, "You'll regret this." As soon as the taxi started moving, I called Alistair. The first time, he didn't answer. The second time, he picked up, his voice icy. What is it? Why are you calling me like this? Where is Cora? He paused for a few seconds. Calm down. Mother just took her to a family dinner. I cut him off. Where is my daughter right now? Alistair lowered his voice, but I could hear the confusion in it. Genevieve, don't make this complicated. Mother missed her granddaughter. I interrupted him again. She didn't miss Cora. She missed my weak spot. Now you listen to me very carefully. If my child is not safe in 30 minutes, I will submit all of Apex's financial documents along with a report of child abduction from an educational institution. There was dead silence on the other end. This man might not fear my tears, but he was terrified of that memory card. 18 minutes later, a black car pulled up to the preschool gates. Alistair's assistant carried Cora out. When she saw me, she threw herself into my arms and sobbed. Her hair was messy, her collar was askew, and she was still clutching her little bunny backpack. I hugged her, my whole body trembling. Cora, are you hurt? She shook her head, sobbing. Grandma said if I didn't behave, Mommy wouldn't come back for me. I closed my eyes. Some words don't leave bruises on the skin, but they wound a child's soul deeper than any switch. I carried Cora to the principal's office. Miss Gable was crying and apologizing. The principal was also pale. I didn't scream. I just placed the documents on the table, my signed directive stating only I could pick up my child, a screenshot of the teacher's text, and the information about the unfamiliar driver. I said clearly, I don't need your apologies. I need the school to file an official report. From this day forward, if I am not here, or someone with a notarized power of attorney from me, no one is to walk my daughter out of these gates. Later that evening, my lawyer, Marcus, arrived. He spoke with the school administration, helped me file for an emergency protective order, and updated the list of authorized individuals for pickup. I signed every paper, my hands still ice cold. That night, Cora didn't want to take her bath alone. She sat in the warm water and kept asking, Mommy, you won't leave me, will you? I knelt beside the tub and wiped her face. No. Even if the whole world says something different, I will never leave you, Cora. She looked at me for a long time, then asked, And the fact that I'm a girl, does that make you sad? I hugged her, right there in the warm steam. I am so proud that you're my daughter. It doesn't matter if you're a girl or a boy. What matters is being a good person. That night, I took Cora to see a child psychologist, Dr. Evans. Her small office had shelves of books and stuffed animals. She didn't interrogate Cora, just gave her paper and crayons. Cora drew a large house with no windows. Inside were 3 boys wearing crowns, and outside, standing in the rain, was a little girl. I looked at that drawing, and my eyes stung. Leaving the office, Cora held my hand tighter than usual. The Boston sky had cleared after the rain. I knew that from this moment on, the fight wasn't just about a divorce. It was a fight for the right to be a mother, for the right to protect my child, and for the right not to let anyone use the word family as an excuse to cause pain. Returning to the apartment that evening, Cora wouldn't leave my side. I sat her on a stool and poured her a glass of warm milk. She held the glass with both hands, taking small sips, and kept glancing at the door as if afraid that if she blinked, Eleanor would reappear on the threshold. I didn't question her. The psychologist had warned me that children's answers often lie in their drawings, not their words. So I just laid out paper on the table and set out the box of crayons. Draw whatever you want, Cora. She was silent for a long time, then picked up a black crayon. The first thing she drew was a huge house with a high roof, thick walls, and a gate that took up almost the entire page. But this house had no windows, no smoke from the chimney, no trees. Inside, Cora drew 3 boys in crowns, sitting at a table. And outside, in the rain, stood a tiny girl holding a teddy bear. I sat next to her, my hands growing cold. "Who is that girl, Cora?" She lowered her head. "That's me. Why are you standing outside?" Cora took a gray crayon and added more raindrops, because Grandma said little girls should be seen and not heard. The brothers get to talk about the company with Dad, and I have to stay quiet in the corner. I turned away so she wouldn't see my tears. I thought I had seen all the injustice in that house. It turned out there were knives being plunged into my child while I was busy making soup, washing dishes, putting 3 boys to bed. Over the following days, we continued to see Dr. Evans. Her office had no luxury, just a few wooden chairs, a bookshelf, and a goldfish in a tank. But Cora entered without fear, not like she used to cross the threshold of the mansion. The psychologist let her choose her own colors, tell her own stories. One day, Cora drew a long table with a huge roasted duck. 3 boys held forks, while a girl in the corner had an empty plate. The psychologist asked gently, "In your old house, where did you usually sit at the table?" Cora answered quietly, "Next to Mommy." But Grandma said not to reach for food first, because Sterling is the most important. "Were you sad?" Cora nodded. "Sad." But Mommy was busy. She was cutting up the food for Pierce. I didn't want to bother her. Those words hurt me more than any insult. I loved my daughter, but sometimes the whirlwind of life in the Beaumont house pulled me in so deeply that I didn't see my own child standing alone in a dark corner. Dr. Evans slowly took notes. At the end of the session, she told me in private, "Genevieve, Cora is showing signs of anxiety and fear of abandonment. What she describes indicates systematic bias treatment. Just provide her with a stable and safe environment, and do not allow the relatives from the other side to have unsupervised contact with her at this time." I nodded. Each word was like a stone on my heart. But at least now, someone had seen Cora's wounds, documented them, and they were no longer a vague pain within 4 walls. Just then, my lawyer Marcus called. "Are you at the clinic?" "Yes, we just finished our session." "Be careful on your way back." This morning, Alistair Beaumont filed a motion demanding custody of Cora. I froze in the hallway. "He wants to take Cora?" "Yes. The motion claims you have an unstable income, inadequate living conditions, freelance work, and signs of emotional instability following the divorce. They also argue that the Beaumont family can provide superior material conditions." I laughed, but a lump formed in my throat. Superior material conditions? In the house where my child drew herself standing in the rain? Marcus sighed. "That's why we have to be prepared. Your illustration contracts, bank statements, lease agreement, the report from the school, the psychologist's evaluation, the evidence of the media smear campaign, the camera footage of the attempted intrusion, all of this will become the fence that protects you and Cora." I looked through the glass. Cora was inside, drawing a small sun in the corner of her paper with a yellow crayon. I said, "Marcus, I'm not as rich as Alistair, but I will not let them buy my daughter with a mansion. You don't have to be richer. You just have to prove where the child is safer." After that call, I barely rested. During the day, I drew to earn money and took Cora to preschool and therapy. At night, I organized documents into folders. Folder 1. Cora's documents. Folder 2. Contracts and statements. Folder 3. Evidence of pressure from the Beaumonts. Folder 4. Notarized articles of slander. Every sheet of paper I placed on the table reminded me, you can't defeat the wealthy with tears, but the truth can rob them of their peace. One evening, Marcus came to see me. He looked at the stacks of folders and said, "There is one person who, if she agrees to testify, will significantly strengthen our position." I looked up. "Who?" "Tanya Beaumont, Alistair's cousin. She used to be the chief accountant at Apex Holdings." The name made me freeze. I remembered Tanya, a tall, quiet woman who had appeared a few times at family dinners. Eleanor disliked her. I once heard her yelling into the phone that Tanya is a traitor to the family. She eats our bread but won't protect the family. I didn't understand then. Now I think that betraying the family was probably just a refusal to sign fraudulent documents. Marcus continued. She resigned suddenly. I suspect she knows about the fictitious accounts and shell companies, but she's very cautious. Be prepared. She might not help. Arrange a meeting with her. 3 days later, we met Tanya in an old cafe downtown. A cherry tree grew by the entrance, and the wooden tables were worn. Quiet music played. Tanya arrived on time, wearing a white blouse, her hair in a bun. She looked me up and down, without contempt, but also without friendliness. Marcus briefly introduced us. Tanya just nodded and asked directly, "What do you want from me?" I replied, "I want to know the truth about Apex Holdings. And, if possible, I want you to testify to what you know." Tanya gave a bitter smile. "The truth? You lived in that house for 10 years. Didn't you see anything?" The question wasn't malicious, but it was sharp. I paused. I saw things, but I thought that by yielding, I was preserving the family. Only now do I realize that by yielding in the wrong places, I was the one who burned it down. Tanya looked at me longer. Her gaze warmed, but didn't soften. "The Beaumonts are not easy to fight. Are you sure you want to go all the way?" I thought of Cora, of the drawing of the house with no windows, of her trembling hands when someone knocked on the door. I'm going to the end, not to defeat them. I'm doing this so my daughter never has to go back there. Tanya looked down and stirred her black coffee. The spoon tinkled softly against the cup. After a moment, she opened her bag, took out a flash drive, placed it on the table, but didn't push it toward me yet. "Then, before I give you this, listen. Because from the moment you open it, you won't just be fighting a bad husband, you'll be touching the very foundation of Apex Holdings." Tanya stared at the flash drive on the table as if it were something both familiar and terrifying. The cafe was not crowded. Outside, cherry blossoms fell onto the sidewalk. My lawyer, Marcus, sat beside me in silence. He didn't rush her. He probably understood that for someone like Tanya, who had walked away from Apex, speaking the truth was like reopening an old wound. I said slowly, "Miss Beaumont, I don't need your sympathy. I need you to say what you know. The rest, my lawyer and I will handle legally." Tanya's lips twisted. "The law?" When I worked at Apex, I thought so too. But the Beaumonts don't live by the laws of truth and falsehood. They live by the laws of kinship, money, and the signature phrase, "for the greater good." I remembered Eleanor was also fond of that phrase. For the greater good, a daughter-in-law must endure. For the greater good, a granddaughter must stand behind the grandsons. For the greater good, the honest must be silent, and the guilty must sit at the head of the table. Tanya placed a thin stack of papers next to the flash drive. Apex is a 3-layer cake. On the outside, it's a respectable construction company, beautiful offices, photos from charity events. But dig deeper, and the foundation has long since rotted. She turned over the first page. It was a comparative price list for materials for a school construction project in a Boston suburb. One column showed the actual purchase price, the other, the price in the contract. Some items were inflated by nearly 50%. The first layer is fake invoices and price gouging. Cement, bricks, plumbing, everything was purchased at an inflated cost. Large contracts were broken down into smaller ones to avoid strict oversight. It looks like there are many suppliers, but in reality, they're all connected. "Connected to Alistair?" I asked. "To Alistair, his trusted associates, and there's a shadow of Sabrina in there." Sabrina's name fell onto the table like a hot coal. Tanya showed me a diagram of companies. Unfamiliar names connected by arrows. Anne, Textiles, World Logistics, Star Consulting. The addresses were different, but the contact numbers led to several of Sabrina's old acquaintances. "See Star Consulting?" Tanya tapped the paper with her nail. It received money for consultations, promotion, and entertainment expenses, and it had only 2 employees, Sabrina's cousin and Alistair's former driver. Marcus asked, "Do you have original documents confirming the movement of funds?" Tanya nodded. "On the flash drive. Emails, transfer statements, draft contracts, and files I managed to copy from my section before they revoked my access. I didn't take anything that wasn't related to my accounting responsibilities. I didn't want to turn from a whistleblower into a data thief." I fell silent. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had learned to save evidence to avoid being eaten alive. Tanya moved on to the second layer. The second layer is the Eleanor Beaumont Foundation. I knew of the foundation. Eleanor would appear on television, in an elegant suit, handing out backpacks to underprivileged schoolchildren. When she came home, she would place the newspaper with her photo on the table and say, "Good deeds need publicity too. If you do everything quietly, who will know the Beaumonts have a kind heart?" At the time, I thought that despite her character, she was at least doing something good. Tanya seemed to read my mind. The gifts were indeed given, but out of every $10 allocated for charity, only 3 or 4 reached the children. The rest went to organizational expenses, PR, transportation, and banquets. One report listed the purchase of 200 sets of textbooks for a village, but the warehouse receipts showed only 60 were delivered. Another sponsored furniture for a school, but the money ended up going to a connected furniture company. My throat went dry. Profiting from the poor is bad enough, but profiting in the name of poor children is beyond the pale. Did Eleanor know? She knew. And not only did she know, she loved the foundation. It gave her status among the wives of other tycoons. Marcus quickly made notes. And the third layer? Tanya paused, then looked me straight in the eye. The third layer is connected to Sabrina, and it's the reason Alistair is so afraid of you having that memory card. What about Sabrina? She has leveraged the black book accounting, the fraudulent contracts, and some documents from the clinic. To be more precise, she didn't just give Alistair children. She is his living safe. I gave a bitter laugh. A living safe. Yes. Alistair is smart. He didn't do the dirtiest work in his own name. Some he delegated to trusted associates. Some he ran through companies linked to Sabrina. Sabrina thought she had him on a leash, a way to enter the Beaumont family. But in reality, they both have knives at each other's throats. I remembered Sabrina's meek face in my rented apartment. It turned out those tears were not just to elicit sympathy, but to hide her dirty hands. Marcus asked, "Why did you resign?" Tanya leaned back in her chair. Because of a contract to supply furniture to that same school, they wanted me to sign off on the delivery of a full set, when in fact, nearly a third was missing. I refused. Alistair called me in and said that as a family member, I had to cover for the family. I told him covering doesn't mean signing fake papers. 2 days later, I was transferred to another position, and a month after that, I resigned. How did Eleanor react? I asked. She called me a traitor to the family. Said I took their money but wouldn't protect them. But people often confuse protecting a family with covering up crimes. One is a duty, the other is a sin. Her words silenced me. I said, "If you help me, they will come after you." "I know," Tanya said, placing her hand on the flash drive. "But I've been silent long enough. When I heard the story about your Cora, I thought of my own daughter. If one day she asks me, 'Mom, you knew it was wrong, so why were you silent?' I wouldn't know what to say." For the first time, her voice softened. "Genevieve, I didn't like you before. I thought you lived in that house, saw how Eleanor humiliated others, and said nothing. But now I understand. Everyone has their own cage. And not everyone who is silent is a coward." I looked at her, my eyes stinging. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is just the map. To get to the end, you'll need the originals, witnesses, and the documents from the clinic. If Alistair finds out you met with me, he won't just sit back." Marcus placed the flash drive in a protective evidence bag and drew up a receipt. Tanya signed it, and I signed as a witness. As the pen touched the paper, I felt another door opening. I had thought my war was against a cheating husband, a despotic mother-in-law, and an insolent mistress. But behind the walls of the Back Bay mansion lay a rotten foundation, covered up with family photos and glossy articles about charity. As she was leaving, Tanya told me, "Take care of yourself. The Beaumonts are dangerous when they have money, but they're even more dangerous when they risk losing it." I nodded. "I know, but I can't back down." That evening, back in my apartment, I saw Cora sleeping peacefully next to her box of crayons. In Marcus's briefcase, Tanya's flash drive probably lay silent, but I knew that from that moment on, the Beaumont family's silence had begun to crack. And this time, the crack didn't run across the dining table or through divorce papers. It ran under the very foundation of Apex Holdings. After the meeting with Tanya, I thought I had heard the worst about the Beaumont family. Fake invoices, a plundered charity fund, shell companies in the names of Sabrina's acquaintances. It was all like mud clinging to the soles of my shoes. But Marcus said that the financial documents were one blow, and the story with the 3 children and the Genesis Clinic was another. For the court to see the full picture, we had to prove how they staged this entire performance. I sat at the table, my hand on Cora's box of crayons. She was asleep but would flinch at every creak in the hallway. I asked, "Did you find anyone from that clinic?" Marcus nodded. "The team is working on it. The Genesis Clinic is now called the Center for Health and Longevity. The old owners left, and the doctor whose name is on the documents resigned. But where there are dirty papers, there are usually old employees who remember old stories." 2 days later, his assistant, a young man named Anthony, set up a meeting with us in a cafe near the subway. He was a man of few words, In front of him lay a thin folder with a few photos of the clinic's entrance. The clinic changed its name 3 times, Anthony said. The name Genesis is gone, but the address and some of the administrators are the same. I found a nurse who worked the night shift around the time Sterling and Brooks were born. I clutched my cup of hot tea. Did she agree to talk? Not at first. But when she heard about your Cora, she softened. She said that during those days, a woman named Sabrina Wells gave birth to boys at their clinic, but the discharge papers were not issued in her name. My ears were ringing. Marcus asked for me. Are there documents? Anthony pushed a printout across the table. It's not official proof yet, just preliminary testimony and a few copies that need verification. The nurse says that after Sabrina gave birth, someone from the Beaumont family would come and handle the paperwork privately. Some papers were moved to an internal archive, and a few months later, they would bring you in, Genevieve, to sign papers for an IVF consultation, without explaining all the details. I remembered the white room, the smell of antiseptic. I remembered the doctor telling me not to be nervous. I remembered Alistair holding my hand and saying, "Let me handle everything." Back then, I thought it was love. Only now did I realize that some handshakes aren't meant to support, but to lead you into a trap. Anthony continued. The doctor whose name is on the documents is a Dr. Froling. He resigned suddenly and moved to his hometown in rural Vermont. I haven't met with him yet, but they say he received a large sum for signing the necessary papers. Marcus frowned. We need to be careful with this. We can't draw conclusions without official testimony. I nodded. Haste is the enemy's favorite dish. The more you rush, the easier it is for them to catch you in a mistake. Anthony opened another file with photos. It was a copy of Sabrina's nursing license. Something's not right with this diploma. The number doesn't match the registry, and the year of issuance doesn't correspond to the training period. It's likely a forgery or an altered document belonging to someone else. I remembered Sabrina, leaning over to massage Eleanor, saying, "Trust me, I'm a medical professional." The whole family called her Nurse Sabrina, as if a white coat could make any word true. So, all these years, I said slowly, she was coming to our house not just to care for my mother-in-law. Anthony nodded. Not just for that. The old nurse recognized Sabrina from your family photos. She said Sabrina gave birth at their clinic 3 times, a few years apart, and each time it was connected to a man named Alistair. The details match up very well. I didn't cry. All my tears had probably dried up the day I got the DNA results. What I heard today was just the final nail in the coffin of my trust. Marcus looked at me. Are you all right? I gave a bitter smile. I'm not all right, but I'm sitting. Continue. Anthony moved on to the IVF documents. On several pages, the letters were smeared, but you could see traces of altered dates. My name appeared in the consultation section, not birthing mother. Some lines had been left blank and later filled in with different handwriting. My signature was on the last page. A classic scheme. Alistair would bring a stack of papers and say, "Sign here, I'll do the rest." I had blamed myself many times. But the deceived is not at fault for believing her husband. The one at fault is the one who turned family trust into a forged seal. Marcus said, "This will help prove that you were unaware and did not consent to the legitimization of the 3 children as yours. It also refutes their claim that you are only now abandoning your responsibility." I looked out the cafe window. Outside, people hurried in the rain. Life went on. Only I was sitting here, peeling back layer after layer of my marriage. Eleanor knew from the beginning, didn't she? I asked. Anthony replied, "It's highly probable. There's a history of payments to the clinic from an account registered to Eleanor's former housekeeper. The payments for all 3 of Sabrina's births came from the same source." I closed my eyes. Eleanor didn't just know. She participated. She chose grandsons over truth, status over conscience. Images flashed through my mind. Sterling sleeping on my shoulder, Brooks with his inhaler, Pierce with his face smeared with pumpkin puree. The children were not to blame for being born into a lie. But it was this lie that turned them into weapons aimed at me and my daughter. I asked Anthony, why did Sabrina keep these documents? To keep Alistair on a leash. On one hand, she wanted to enter the Beaumont family with official status. On the other, she kept the clinic documents and financial papers so that if he abandoned her, she would have something to bargain with. Marcus added, Sabrina is not as simple as she seems. She is the biological mother of 3 children, the keeper of the secret of fictitious motherhood, and a participant in financial fraud. Consider her a calculated opponent. I remembered Sabrina's moist eyes in my rented apartment. Yes, tears can be both real and fake. Tears of pain are salty. Tears of calculation are cold. As we were leaving, Marcus told me not to contact Sabrina, not to call Alistair, and certainly not to publish anything. Everything had to proceed through legal channels. In the evening, I picked up Cora. She ran out of her classroom with a new drawing in her hand. It showed a tree by a window, and in the tree were two birds. One, large, had its wings spread, protecting the smaller one. "Mommy, that's you and me." I pressed the drawing to my chest, feeling both pain and warmth. Adults build a stage and force children to play roles, heirs, outsiders, extras. But children don't need a stage. They need a home where no one lies. That night, I placed the folder with the clinic documents next to Tanya's flash drive. Two sharp claws dug into the wall of the Beaumont house. One into the money, the other into the bloodline. I knew that Alistair would now want more than just my silence. He would want me to disappear from the game he himself had started. But it was too late. I had seen the true faces of Sabrina, Eleanor, and the husband who once told me, "Just trust me." The next day, after receiving more documents from my lawyer, I thought the worst was over the forged seals and corrected signatures in the clinic's records. But by evening, I realized that the most painful crack doesn't run through paper. It runs through a child's eyes. Around 4:30, as I was picking Cora up from preschool, my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered, and on the other end, I heard Brooks's quiet voice. "Genevieve?" I froze in the middle of the schoolyard. "Brooks, where are you?" "At Grandma's house." Sterling heard Dad and Grandma arguing. "He knows everything." "Knows what?" "That you're not our mom." "That our mom is Sabrina." The last words were spoken very softly. From the other end, I heard Eleanor yelling somewhere in the distance. "Brooks, who are you talking to?" Brooks whispered quickly, "Jen, Sterling is really mad. He said he's coming to your place to find out everything." The call cut off. I grabbed Cora and almost ran home. The wind whipped at my face. I wasn't afraid of Sterling yelling at me. I was afraid that a 10-year-old boy wouldn't know what to do with his pain. When we got to the apartment, I locked the door securely. Cora had just finished changing when we heard footsteps pounding in the hallway, followed by a loud bang on the door. "Open up!" Sterling's voice was hoarse and breaking. I opened the door a crack. Sterling stood outside, red-faced, in his school uniform. Behind him, Brooks was gasping for air, tugging at his sleeve. Pierce was with them too, his eyes puffy from crying, clutching a toy car. "Tell me!" Sterling screamed. "Was it you who told Dad we're not your kids?" I opened the door wider, trying to speak calmly. "Sterling, come inside. Don't shout on the stairs. I can talk right here. Have you been lying to us this whole time?" The question stabbed me in the chest. I looked at the boy and remembered the child who had slept on my shoulder during a fever. But now, before me stood a child who had been thrown to the ground by the truth, and in his pain, he wanted to throw that pain at the nearest person. "I haven't been lying to you," I said. "Then why aren't you our mom?" He pointed a finger at me, tears streaming from his eyes. "Grandma said it's because of you that everything in the house has gone wrong. Dad is yelling at Sabrina. Sabrina is crying. Everyone says you don't want us anymore." Cora peeked out from behind me. Seeing her, Sterling turned even redder. He burst into the room and tore Cora's drawings from the wall. He crumpled one and threw the other on the floor. A frame shattered with a crash. Cora shrieked and scrambled under the table. "Sterling, stop it!" I stepped forward and grabbed Sterling's wrist. Not hard enough to hurt him, but enough to make him stop. He looked at me and tried to pull away. "Let go! You only love Cora and you abandoned us." I took a deep breath. If I was too soft now, Cora would suffer. If I was too harsh, Sterling would be convinced he had been abandoned. I looked him straight in the eye. "I took care of you when you had a fever of 104. I held Brooks when he couldn't breathe. I stayed up nights with Pierce when he was teething. That was not a lie. My love for you was not a lie." Sterling sobbed. "Then why did you give up on us?" "Because the adults were lying. Because I couldn't live in a house that used you to hold me hostage while humiliating Cora. You are not to blame for being born, but you have no right to tear up Cora's drawings and frighten her." Sterling looked at the broken glass. Brooks lowered his head. Pierce started to cry. "I want Mommy," he whimpered. "I want Mommy, Genevieve." Those words made my heart ache. But I didn't pick Pierce up like I used to. I knelt in front of them. "I'm here, but from now on, things will be different. You have a biological mother. Sabrina is the one who gave birth to you." Sterling gave a crooked smile. "Sabrina doesn't know what I like. She told me to get my own water, but you always made me tea with honey when I coughed. He fell silent. I picked up the crumpled drawing and smoothed it out. Sterling, there are people who give birth but don't know how to love properly. And there are those who haven't given birth but have loved truly. But loving truly doesn't mean letting yourself be used forever. Brooke suddenly spoke in a trembling voice. If you're not our mom, then those nights you patted my back so I could breathe, was that a lie too? I turned to Brooks. No, Brooks, it wasn't a lie. When I called you my son, my heart was sincere. The only lies were the adults' words. Pierce came over and handed me his toy car. Mommy, fix the wheel. The wheel was loose. I took the car, fixed it, and gave it back, but I didn't pull him into a hug. He took it. Next time if you miss me, ask the adults to call. You can't run away from home. It's dangerous. Sterling wiped his tears with his sleeve. You hate us. I shook my head. I don't hate you, but I have to protect Cora. And you have to learn to protect those who are weaker. Being an heir doesn't mean you're allowed to do whatever you want. Hurried footsteps sounded on the stairs. The Beaumonts' former housekeeper ran into the apartment, pale. Oh, boys, I've been looking all over for you. Your grandmother is going crazy at home. I stood up and collected the broken glass in a paper bag. Take them home, and tell Eleanor that if the children come here again without permission and make a mess, I will call the police. Sterling looked at me one last time. His expression no longer held its usual defiance, only confusion, hurt, and something that looked like regret. Before leaving, Brooks turned and asked quietly, Genevieve, what should we call you now? I paused. When you don't know what to call me, just call me Genevieve. It's okay. The three boys left. The apartment was quiet again, but shards of glass glittered on the floor. Cora was still under the table, her hands over her ears. I knelt beside her. Cora, they're gone. Mommy's here. She threw herself into my arms and sobbed. I'm scared. I don't want them to come and break everything. I hugged her tightly. I'm sorry I scared you. From now on, I will protect our home better. That night, I didn't draw. I sat and taped Cora's torn drawings back together. Some would never be the same. Over one of the tears, I stuck a yellow paper circle. Cora looked at it and asked, It's not pretty, is it, Mommy? I shook my head. No. A mended wound has its own story. Late that night, my phone lit up. A text from an unknown number, but I knew it was Brooks. Jen, Pierce is crying. He's calling for you. Sabrina is yelling at him, says he's being spoiled. I don't know what to do. I reread it several times, my heart aching. On the first night after learning the truth, the three children realized they didn't have a single adult who could just calmly hug them. I replied, Wipe his face with a warm cloth. Put my inhaler next to your pillow. If it gets hard to breathe, call the housekeeper right away. I'm not abandoning you, but I can't go back to that house. After sending the message, I put the phone down. Outside, the lights of the Beaumont mansion were still on. But I knew that in that huge house, three children were feeling homeless for the first time. The next morning, as soon as I had dropped Cora at preschool, Marcus called. His voice was more serious than usual. Genevieve, law enforcement has begun a review of some of Apex's documents. No conclusions yet, but they've requested the records for the Beaumont Foundation and several supply contracts. I stood under a tree by the preschool gate, holding Cora's hat. So, it started. Yes. And from this point on, Alistair Beaumont is going to be very angry. Cora, standing with her teacher, turned and waved at me. She was still afraid of strangers, but at least she could now walk into the preschool without clinging to my skirt. I said quietly, Marcus, I just hope this doesn't drag the children in any deeper. Marcus paused. The adults dragged them in a long time ago. We're just bringing the truth to light. That phrase haunted me all morning. While I sat in my apartment trying to finish drawings for a client, a storm was raging in the Beaumont mansion. Tanya later told me the story, supplementing it with messages Brooks secretly sent me. Alistair summoned Sabrina to his study. I had once dusted the bookshelves in that room. On the wall hung a photograph taken on the day Apex's new office opened. In it, Alistair was smiling. Eleanor stood beside him with the three boys in matching suits. And I, holding Cora, was at the edge, as if I had accidentally wandered into the shot. Sabrina entered, still trying to appear meek. Alistair, you wanted to see me? Alistair threw a stack of papers on the desk. The authorities are interested in Star Consulting. Explain. Sabrina's face changed. Why Star? You said I was just a liaison there. Alistair slammed his hand on the desk. I asked you to keep the documents, not leave a trail. If they dig deeper, you'll have to say it was your own personal initiative. I have nothing to do with it. Sabrina froze. What did you say? You heard me. All expenses through Star, you did it yourself to make money. The company's lawyers will work in that direction. The woman who had been so sure of her power because she held Alistair's secrets finally understood that the knife she was holding could be turned against her. She let out a dry laugh. No tears came. Alistair, we have 3 children. You asked me to keep the clinic documents yourself. The Beaumont Foundation, the contracts, the seals, I did everything under your direction. And now you want to throw me out on the street? Alistair sat down coolly in his chair. Understand this. If I go down, our sons will be left with nothing too. If you keep quiet, there's a chance to survive. If you talk, you'll dig your own grave. Sabrina left the study in a daze. In the hallway, Brooks, hiding behind a ficus tree, overheard the last phrases. He sent me a short message. Jen, Dad is yelling at Sabrina. She's crying, but quietly. I read it and felt a chill. In that house, even crying had to be calculated. That same day, Sabrina packed her things. She didn't take many clothes. Just a small bag, some cash, documents, and a dark blue metal box she had hidden at the bottom of Eleanor's medicine cabinet. I had once glimpsed that box. At the time, Sabrina said it contained sleeping pills and prescriptions for my mother-in-law, and that it shouldn't be touched. Only now did I understand that it wasn't medicine inside. It held the original contracts of the shell companies, flash drives, double-entry bookkeeping, copies of the clinic documents, the seal of Star Consulting, and an audio recording of Alistair saying they needed to make me sign the divorce papers before I had a chance to use the DNA and the leverage on Apex. Sabrina took that box not to save me. She took it because she realized Alistair was preparing to sacrifice her. Life is a strange thing. When a storm hits, people in the same sinking boat first try to throw each other overboard. That evening, Sabrina disappeared. Eleanor was the first to notice. The housekeeper brought her tea and saw that the closet in Sabrina's room was open, her things scattered. She called Alistair. According to Brooks, Alistair's shout was heard on the 2nd floor. Find her, check the cameras, call everyone she knows. Eleanor asked, trembling. What did she take? Alistair didn't answer. He rummaged through the medicine cabinet, pulled out drawers, even smashed his mother's wooden box of pearls. When he couldn't find the metal box, his face changed. Eleanor understood. She took the box? She whispered. Alistair turned. Mother, you knew where she hid it and you didn't tell me. Eleanor leaned on the table. You trusted her with everything, and now you're questioning me? I told you women like that can only be trusted to bear children, not to keep documents. It was bitter. Eleanor herself had brought Sabrina into the house to humiliate me. And now that Sabrina held the entire family by the throat, she called her a woman like that. It's true what they say. People love the feast until they choke on a bone, then they blame the cook. Meanwhile, on the internet, Alistair's PR team continued to sling mud at me. I was portrayed as a wife taking revenge on her husband out of spite, using company scandals and hiding behind her daughter to sue for a fortune. One account even posted Cora's drawing, calling her an instrument for evoking pity. Reading this, I turned off my phone, my hands shaking with rage. Marcus had told me not to respond. He and Tanya were waiting for the PR team to make a mistake. And they did. An internal email was mistakenly sent to an old mailing list that Tanya still had access to through an archive. In the email, the head of the PR department reported to Alistair. The current media campaign should be built on the image of a mother who abandoned her 3 sons and is using her daughter as a shield. This will reduce the credibility of any documents Genevieve Hayes provides. Tanya immediately saved the email, printed it, had the time of receipt notarized, and passed it to Marcus. When he read the email to me, I sat in silence for a long time. So, they had been purposefully targeting me from the very beginning. Marcus said, yes. This is proof that the smear was planned, not just internet rumors. It will carry weight in the defamation case, and will also prove that the environment in that family is not suitable for a child. I looked at Cora, who was cutting a sun out of colored paper. She didn't know that adults had made her name a shield in their war for money. I felt my heart turn to stone. Not because it had stopped hurting, but because the pain was too great to allow myself to fall. That night, Brooks texted again. Jen, Dad broke the picture in the living room. Grandma is crying. Sterling locked himself in his room and won't eat. I'm scared. I didn't know what to say to an 8-year-old boy caught in the middle of ruins created by adults. In the end, I wrote, stay in the room with Pierce. Don't listen to the arguments. If you have trouble breathing, use your inhaler and call the housekeeper. In the Beaumont mansion, The family portrait in the living room had been thrown to the floor. The glass was shattered. In the photo, everyone was smiling. The fake smiles were now mixed with real shards. Alistair stood in the middle of the room, his eyes red, roaring at his men. "Find Sabrina! Find that box before the police do." Brooks's message kept me awake for another night. Outside, the lights in the neighborhood had almost all gone out. Only the yellow glow from a 2-4-hour diner fell on the damp wall. Cora slept beside me, hugging her bear, sometimes frowning in her sleep as if she could hear the shouting. I sat at the table, staring at the folders of documents. Each folder was a blow to Apex's glossy facade. But the more evidence I had, the closer I felt the danger. A cornered man, if he has a shred of conscience, might reconsider. But one who lives only for his image is capable of unpredictable things. The next morning, Marcus called to inform me that the accounts related to the Beaumont Foundation and several shell companies were under deeper investigation. Some transactions required explanation. Apex's partners began canceling meetings. The glowing articles about Alistair in the papers stopped. No one declared him guilty, but the applause had died down. The man accustomed to being on stage felt the floorboards begin to tremble. In the mansion, Eleanor was going mad with humiliation. Those who had once called her Dear Eleanor suddenly stopped calling. The club of tycoons' wives where they drank tea fell silent. Someone even returned an invitation to the Beaumont Foundation's charity gala, citing family circumstances. That day, Eleanor received a summons regarding the incident with Cora at the preschool. According to the former housekeeper, who secretly told Tanya everything, she held the paper with trembling hands. "They're taking me to court for picking up my own granddaughter? What kind of times are these, when a grandmother has to ask a daughter-in-law for permission to see her child?" Alistair returned from the office at that moment, in a rumpled suit, with dark circles under his eyes. He didn't comfort his mother. He snatched the summons from her, scanned it, and threw it on the table. "Mother, I told you not to touch Cora. Do you think I have the strength to clean up your messes right now?" Eleanor froze. "Alistair, is that how you speak to your mother?" "I'm speaking the truth. The more you act, the more reasons Genevieve has to destroy us. Do you want all of Apex to burn down because of your temper tantrum?" The mother who had revered her son as her son stood in the middle of the living room. It probably wasn't the shouting that hurt her, but the first time she saw that the child she had exalted now saw her as nothing more than a problem to be rid of. But Eleanor didn't blame herself. She turned her anger on me. In her mind, if I hadn't left, if I hadn't done the DNA test, if I hadn't hired a lawyer, if I had just kept bowing, everything would have been fine. People accustomed to being worshipped rarely think they are wrong. They think others have stopped knowing their place. The next day, after dropping Cora at preschool, I got back to work. Around 4 o'clock, I went down to the market to buy some herbs, tomatoes, and a little meat for soup. The familiar vendor asked, "Getting onions today?" I had just nodded when my phone rang. "An unknown number," I answered. On the other end, there was only heavy breathing, then Eleanor's hoarse and cold voice. "If you want to see your daughter, come alone to the old lumberyard behind the East Side bus depot." The bag of vegetables fell from my hands. "Cora is at preschool. What are you talking about?" Eleanor let out a soft laugh. The sound sent a chill down my spine. "You think you're the only one who can use pieces of paper? Your apartment has a door too, and doors can be opened." I ran up the stairs like a madwoman. The apartment door was ajar, the lock broken. In the room, Cora's little bunny backpack lay on the floor, the box of crayons overturned, scattered everywhere. My daughter. My friend was supposed to pick her up. I had asked for her help that day. But Eleanor must have followed them, waited for the moment the child came home, and I went down to the market. I called my daughter's name, my voice breaking. "Cora!" In response, only silence. Just a cold little room and my daughter's jacket on a chair. The phone rang again. Eleanor's voice. "Don't scream, she's alive. If you want her to stay that way, bring 3 things. First, a statement withdrawing all lawsuits against Alistair. Second, a pledge not to use the DNA results to defame my grandsons. Third, an agreement waiving all claims to assets. Sign them, and I'll give you the child." I grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Eleanor, you've kidnapped your own granddaughter. Don't lecture me. She is my granddaughter before she is your daughter. If you hadn't backed my family into a corner, I wouldn't have had to do this." She put Cora on the phone. There was a pause, then Cora's muffled voice. "Mommy, I'm scared." I closed my eyes, tears streaming down, but my voice had to be firm. Cora, listen to me. Breathe slowly. I'm on my way. Eleanor snatched the phone back. Don't you dare call the police. This place is full of dry wood. All I need is one match, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life. The call ended. For the first few seconds, I couldn't think. Then, like a bell, all of Marcus's instructions rang in my head. I couldn't rush in blindly. I couldn't let Cora die because of my panic. I opened the navigation app on my phone, turned on location sharing for Marcus. My hands shaking so much, I missed the button several times. I typed a message. Eleanor kidnapped Cora. Old lumberyard behind Eastside Bus Depot. She has gasoline and a lighter. I'm going. I sent photos of the broken lock, the scattered things, and called Marcus. He answered immediately. Stay where you are. I'm calling the police. No. She said to come alone. If I don't go, she might. He's there. Let them know, but don't call me. Follow my location. Stall for time, Marcus said quickly. Do not engage in confrontation. Don't sign anything unless it's necessary to save her life. I understand. I shoved the phone in my pocket and grabbed Cora's scarf from the chair. It still smelled of children's shampoo. I pressed it to my chest for a second and ran outside. A taxi stopped in front of me. The elderly driver, seeing my pale face, asked, Are you going to the hospital? I gave him the address, my voice barely obeying me. Please, hurry. My child is in danger. The car sped through the congested evening streets. Red lights felt like an eternity. The city noise, the honking, the shouts of vendors, it all blended into a single roar. And in my head, only Cora's voice echoed. I bit my lip until it bled. My mother used to say that even a wild animal protects its young. But in life, there are people who use their own grandchildren to save their image. The farther we got from the city center, the more deserted the streets became. Abandoned warehouses and industrial zones lined the roads. The sun was setting, its red rays falling on the rusty roofs like the reflection of a fire. I got out of the taxi before we reached the lumberyard, afraid the driver would get too close. The wind carried the smell of dust, damp wood, and something acrid that sent a chill down my spine. The door of the old warehouse was ajar. It was dark inside. I approached, each step echoing in my heart. As my hand touched the edge of the door, the hinges creaked in response. The sharp smell of gasoline hit me, and in the darkness I heard Cora's muffled sobs. Mommy. I froze on the threshold of the lumberyard, unable to breathe. In the dim light filtering through holes in the roof, I saw Cora tied to a plastic chair in the center of the warehouse. Her wrists were bound with rope, her mouth was covered with duct tape, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Around her were piles of sawdust, old planks, and several open canisters emitting the acrid smell of gasoline. A single spark would be enough. Eleanor stood a few feet away, her hair disheveled, her expensive coat askew. In one hand, she held a stack of papers. In the other, a silver lighter. I forced myself to swallow my panic. Eleanor, I'm here. Let Cora go. She looked at me with wild eyes. You think I'm a fool? I let her go, and you refuse to sign? Cora shook her head, her cries muffled by the tape. I wanted to rush to her, but I knew one move and Eleanor would strike the lighter. I forced myself to stay put. You want me to sign? I'll sign. But the child is terrified. Let me at least take off the tape so she can breathe. Eleanor raised the lighter. Stay right there. One more step and I'll light it. I saw her thumb on the lighter's wheel, and my heart pounded so hard it hurt. In my back pocket, my phone continued to transmit my location. I didn't know where the lawyer and the police were. I only knew I had to buy time. Eleanor threw the papers onto an old wooden table. Sign. A withdrawal of all lawsuits, a pledge not to use the DNA, a waiver of all assets. Sign all three, and I'll give you the child. I slowly approached the table, my hands raised to show I was unarmed. But you need to calm down. It's so dry in here. If it catches fire, no one will get out alive. She laughed hysterically. And now you're scared? I thought you were the brave one. Hired lawyers, old accountants, dragged the whole world in to destroy my home. I picked up the pen lying on the table. The tip trembled on the paper, but I didn't sign. I looked up at her. You say I destroyed your home, but who cooked memorial dinners for you for 10 years? Who drove your grandsons to the hospital in the middle of the night? Who managed your endless doctors and physical therapy appointments? Eleanor froze for a moment, then snapped, That was your duty as a daughter-in-law. A daughter-in-law's duty does not include deceptively raising other people's children. And it doesn't include having to watch your own daughter be treated as if she's nothing. Her face contorted. She pointed the lighter at me but didn't strike it. Be quiet. If you hadn't brought out those papers, Alistair would still be CEO, my grandsons would be legitimate heirs, and our family would still have its reputation. I put the pen down, speaking more quietly. Eleanor, a reputation won't save a terrified child, and legitimate statuses won't make a lie the truth. You love your grandsons, but right now, you're using your granddaughter as a fuse. Cora looked at me, tears rolling down her cheeks. I tried to give her a faint smile to let her know I was in my right mind. Eleanor backed toward a canister of gasoline. Don't lecture me on being a grandmother. I've lived for over 60 years, and no one has ever dared to humiliate me like this. People are laughing at me, avoiding me, returning my invitations, all because of you. Not because of me, I said distinctly. Because of what you and Alistair did? Shut up! Her scream echoed through the warehouse. A frightened bird flew up from the rafters. I heard the very faint sound of a siren in the distance. I slowly took another half step. Do you remember the night I lost my firstborn? My stomach had been aching all morning, and you still made me stand at the stove. I didn't blame you. I still called you mother. I brought you medicine, made you compresses. You didn't have to love me, but Cora is your own blood. She's only 5 years old. The hand holding the lighter trembled. Something flickered in her eyes, not remorse, but hesitation. I stepped forward more quickly. Let her go. Let the adults answer for their own actions. Eleanor suddenly screamed, "Don't come any closer!" Her finger twitched, and a spark flashed. I lunged forward, forgetting my fear, and grabbed her wrist. The lighter fell to the floor, missing the puddle of gasoline. She struggled, scratching my neck. Let go! I held her hand, shouting to Cora, "Close your eyes!" We fought amidst the piles of trash. Eleanor, despite her age, was strong in her madness. She pushed me, and I hit my back against the edge of the table. Pain shot through me. Clenching my teeth, I used my last bit of strength to kick the lighter away. It slid across the floor and disappeared into a dark corner. Eleanor backed away, wanting to go after it, but tripped on a plank and fell to the floor next to an old machine. She cried out in pain. One of her legs was bent at an unnatural angle. I didn't hesitate. I ran to Cora, tore off the tape, and untied the ropes. Cora burst into loud sobs, clinging to my neck. "Mommy, I thought you weren't coming." I hugged her, and finally, my own tears streamed down. I came. I'm sorry. I'm here. At the warehouse entrance, we heard footsteps, and flashlight beams swept across the walls. Marcus was the first to shout my name, Genevieve. Behind him were the police and several local residents. One of the officers quickly moved the gasoline canisters away. Another went to Eleanor. Marcus took off his jacket and wrapped it around Cora's shoulders. She wouldn't let go of me. I pointed to the lighter in the corner, the puddle of gasoline, the ropes, the papers on the table. It's all there. The recording of the threats is on my phone. The location I sent. My voice was hoarse but clear. I don't want anyone to say this was just a family misunderstanding. Eleanor lay on the floor, pale with pain. She looked from me to Cora, her lips moving, but no words came out. A few minutes later, they brought a stretcher. As they lifted her, she was still trying to ask, "Where's Alistair?" "Get Alistair for me." Alistair appeared when it was almost over. He stood at the entrance of the warehouse, in an expensive shirt, his face deathly pale. I thought he would run over and ask how Cora was, but the first thing he said to an officer was, "I knew nothing about this. My mother is an elderly woman. It was probably a nervous breakdown." Eleanor heard him. Her eyes widened. The mother who had covered for her son her whole life was now lying on a stretcher, hearing that very son disown her. She called out hoarsely, "Alistair." He looked away. At that moment, I felt no satisfaction, only coldness. It turns out you don't need thunder and lightning for retribution. A single word from the person you love most is enough. I picked up Cora and walked out of the warehouse. The night air smelled of the gasoline that had soaked into her hair. Cora buried her face in my shoulder and whispered, "Mommy, let's go home." I hugged her tighter. "Yes, sweetie, let's go home." Behind me, the red flashing lights of the ambulance swirled on the rusty walls of the warehouse. The fire never ignited. But everything the Beaumont family had so carefully hidden had burned to the ground in that moment. After the incident at the lumberyard, I brought Cora back to our rented apartment. We were both at our breaking point. My daughter slept fitfully, startling and calling out for me. I sat beside her, gently washing the smell of gasoline from her hair with a warm cloth. Eleanor was taken to a hospital under police supervision. Alistair was busy disavowing responsibility, and Sabrina's metal box was still the final missing piece in the hands of justice. The next morning, Marcus came by. The purple scratches from my mother-in-law's nails were still visible on my neck. He placed a folder on the table and said quietly, "Genevieve, the investigators want to speak with Sabrina, but she's hidden herself well. If you agree, I can pass a message to her through legal channels. No persuasions, no promises on behalf of the authorities. Just so she understands, the longer she runs, the worse it will be for her." I looked at the sleeping Cora and nodded. I don't want to fight with her. Just tell her one thing from me. If she has anything left for her 3 children, she should give up that box. Let Sterling, Brooks, and Pierce not grow up with the memory that their world was built on lies. 3 days later, Marcus informed me that Sabrina had made contact. She was hiding in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, with her hair cut short and no makeup, looking nothing like the polished woman who had once sweetly called me Genevieve. She didn't do it out of remorse. She was afraid Alistair would find her first and pin all the blame on her. And perhaps, after the story of Cora's kidnapping, she realized that children couldn't be a shield for adults forever. In a phone call that was officially recorded, I said only one thing. "Sabrina, you gave birth to those children. I raised them. But if you keep running, they will lose both their father and mother in a pile of filth. Give up the box so they at least have a chance at a cleaner future." There was a long silence on the other end, and then Sabrina began to sob. This time, her crying wasn't beautiful, soft, or theatrical. "The box is in a small town outside of Albany, at my aunt's old house. Under the floorboards in the bedroom. I'm afraid Alistair will kill me. He said that if anything happened, I had to take all the blame. A man like him has never loved anyone but himself." That same evening, an investigative team drove to upstate New York. Marcus went with them only as a lawyer providing information. The dark blue metal box was found under old floorboards, wrapped in 2 layers of plastic. Everything was documented and sealed. Inside were the original contracts, flash drives, double-entry ledgers, the seal of the shell company, documents from the Genesis Clinic, the audio recording of Alistair discussing how to force me to sign the divorce, and a list of payments for the media smear campaign. Upon learning that the box had been found, Alistair tried to flee Boston. He didn't go to the mansion, he didn't go to the hospital to see his mother, and he didn't inquire about Cora. He used fake documents to buy a ticket through an acquaintance at the airport, but this time, the net had closed. Alistair was detained by federal agents at the airport security checkpoint. The man who had once, with his legs crossed, forced me to choose a child like an object, now stood with his head bowed between 2 officers. Sabrina was also arrested for forgery, fraud at the clinic, and participation in the activities of shell companies. The head of Alistair's PR department came under investigation for spreading slander and organizing the media harassment. And Eleanor, lying in the hospital with a broken leg, received another summons. I didn't need to curse them. You reap what you sow. The storm they had unleashed didn't strike like thunder, but dragged each of them to the place they deserved. The Beaumont family fell apart. The mansion in Back Bay, which had once hosted grand parties, now stood with its gates locked. Sterling, Brooks, and Pierce were left alone amidst the ruins. Their father was arrested, their mother was arrested, and their grandmother was in the hospital. Relatives were afraid of being drawn into the debts and investigations. Brooks sent me a message. "Jen, where do we go now?" I stared at those words for a long time. I felt sorry for them. But pity didn't mean taking them in. My daughter was just beginning to recover from her fear. I couldn't throw her back into the old storm for the sake of kindness. Through Marcus, I sent a petition to Child Protective Services, explaining the situation. After an evaluation, the boys were temporarily placed in a specialized foster care home. I sent them clothes, books, and an inhaler for Brooks, and made sure they had my lawyer's contact number if they ever needed anything. Before they were moved, I went to say goodbye. Sterling stood in a corner, stripped of his former arrogance. Brooks clutched a bag with his medication. Pierce, upon seeing me, ran toward me but stopped halfway, as if afraid he no longer had the right to hug me. Sterling lowered his head, his voice hoarse. "Mommy Genevieve, I'm sorry I tore up Cora's drawings." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I forgive you. But you have to remember, your pain doesn't give you the right to hurt others. You are children, and the main fault lies with the adults. But from this day forward, you will have to learn to be decent people." Pierce, sobbing, asked. You're not our mom anymore? My throat tightened, but I told the truth. I loved you for real. That hasn't gone away. But first and foremost, I am Cora's mother. If you need anything, I will help you through the adults who are responsible for you. Brooks nodded, his eyes red. A few months later, the divorce hearing took place. Alistair was absent, represented by his lawyer. His side still tried to argue that I was poor, lived in cramped conditions, and couldn't provide for Cora. Marcus presented the court with my illustration contracts, bank statements, lease agreement, the report from the school, the psychologist's evaluation, and all the materials from the kidnapping case at the lumber yard. Every piece of paper that landed on the table gave a voice to my 10 years of silence. The court granted me full custody of Cora and acknowledged my right to a share of the marital assets. The criminal cases were separated into their own proceedings. Hearing the decision, I didn't cry. I just took Cora's hand and felt her small palm grow warm in mine. Later, I rented a small space near our apartment and opened an art studio, the Green Window, for children who had experienced family trauma. Cora gradually recovered. She stopped being afraid of knocks on the door and learned to say, "I don't like that," when other children took her crayons. One evening, she hung a new drawing on the wall titled "A Real Home." It depicted our small apartment with geraniums on the balcony. A mother was holding a daughter's hand, and in the distance was a large mansion with no windows. Cora asked, "Mommy, our house is small, but it's real, right?" I hugged her. A real home is where you're not afraid. There are times in a woman's life when she must endure, but one must not endure to the point of losing oneself. A son is not a guarantee of a happy old age, and a daughter is not a burden. And a family is not a place where the weakest is forced to be silent. It's a place where the weakest is protected.